Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are here again. It is Sunday. I had thought I might not be able to get this out until Monday, but the second debate, the second Tory leadership debate, was a bit shorter than the first. This was the one on ITV. You can see that over my shoulder. Give them appropriate credit. Chaired by Julie Etchingham. Yes, so I've managed to get it out now because it was only an hour long rather than an hour and a half, so I managed to watch it over while I was eating my dinner. Court was depressing. No, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad at all. I'm not going to repeat everything I said yesterday. More or less everything I said yesterday still continues to be as valid as it was then. But I think there were a few more things brought out today, largely in looking at where each of the candidates stands with regard to other candidates, but also a little bit more on the potential futures, I think, which I touched upon yesterday a little bit, but not quite as fully as I might have liked. So I have my notes here. I've got a lot more in general this time rather than candidates. I thought the candidates were they weren't much better than yesterday. I think if you were going to rank it in order of who did best, it's kind of a difficult one. I think Sunak was slickest. But that is often the case. I think Tugendhat did worse today. He wasn't quite as... maybe it was the lack of novelty, I think, possibly didn't help him there. I think Truss did a little bit better today. She's still very wooden, though. Still very formulaic and sort of almost robotic. But she was a little bit better today. She managed to insert a little bit of passion in there and make you feel like she cared a bit. So yeah, I got more in general today, a little less on the individual candidates, but we'll cover the little bits I have got on the individual candidates first and how I thought they went. Rishi Sunak on his campaign media grid this morning, the holy media grid that must be respected at all costs. Clearly, this weekend was Brexit weekend for Rishi. He has been going around the place talking about how he's a devoted Brexiteer. That clearly is at least believed to still have some cachet within the party. I think it still does, although I will come on to that in the general section because I think there is a few points we can make there and look at with regard to that. But Rishi has been very big on Brexit this weekend. He's been pushing that. In particular, he's been pushing this pledge that by the next election, he will have got rid or reformed all EU regulation, all EU law that is still on the statute books. It's an interesting pledge for various reasons. Firstly, because a lot of the stuff that is on there is quite sensible. It's working hours, it's maternity leave, it's things like that. What's he going to do with that? Is he going to get rid of that? Is he going to reform that? In which case, there's going to be a lot of questions about how about exactly he's going to do that. But also, it's a big task. It's a very, very big task, and it's one that the government hasn't actually worked out yet how to do itself. Jacob Rees-Mogg, not long ago, in his capacity as Minister for Brexit Opportunities, he did basically a big spreadsheet for the public and said, we want to know what you want to reform. Here's a big online spreadsheet, go and fill it in. It needn't be said, or at least it shouldn't have to be said, although evidently it does need to be said a little bit in this circumstance. Sorry, I've got an itchy eye for some reason. It shouldn't need to be said in this circumstance, but it does. That's not a very efficient way of doing it. And much like all these sort of Brexit deregulatory promises, it turns out that a lot of the people who wanted them don't actually know what it is they want to change. And yes, and again, they're going to come up against that barrier of most of the stuff is actually pretty sensible stuff that you want and that people would not be happy with you getting rid of. That's generally speaking, governments are always, even take Brexit out of the equation, governments are always keen on deregulation, particularly conservative ones, but generally as well. They always want to cut the red tape. Cameron did it back in the coalition years. He had, I can't remember what it was called now, but there was a big project to cut the red tape. And as all of those sorts of projects are more or less doomed to do, what they found was when they actually came to do it, there wasn't actually much they can cut because most of it is there for a very good reason. So I think that's something that Rishi is selling to here. But again, and this is a recurring theme, and I think we discussed it a little bit yesterday. We'll have to discuss it again, no doubt, on Tuesday. At this point, the candidates aren't pitching to the general public. Every policy they say you have to take with a bit of a pinch of salt, because they're not pitching to the general public, they're pitching to their fellow Tory party members, because they're the electorate at this point. So a lot of these things they're saying probably are never going to happen, or at least if they do, will happen in a very moderated form. So this might be one of those sorts of pledges that is to appeal to the base, to try and convince them that he is as Brexity as some of the other candidates, and try and sell himself that way. After him, and we're doing the same order as we did yesterday, I'll keep it simple each time. Penny Mordaunt. Now, Penny Mordaunt has suffered a lot. Her campaign seems to be stalling a little. She's lost a lot of the early momentum she had. The latest polling figures from Conservative Home, which is quite a useful measure because it's just Conservative members. They're falling off. She's now not first in that. She had been pretty solidly first up until this point as the members' choice. That's now no longer the case. She's now second or third as a rule. Although I know they've changed again this evening. They're doing one a day and they're all over the place. I think Kemi Badenoch is top at the moment. So I mean, what that really tells us is that this race is still kind of, amongst a few candidates at least, it's kind of still all open. It still could be anything, could be anywhere. I think part of it in her case as well, she's had a few little gaffes that haven't helped. I particularly enjoyed the Twitter statement she posted after yesterday's debate, highlighting the comments she'd made about 180 greatest innovations. How many of them are used in the NHS? And the answer was none, with the clear implication that some of them should be. But obviously, that's sort of not how it works. If you innovate, as Isaac Newton did with a cat flap, that's not going to be massively useful in the NHS. So it's not a great measure, is my point. Number of innovations and use in NHS, not massive. If they're medical innovations, go for it. If they're just general innovations, not convinced on that one. So I think that's had a bit of a hit on her campaign. But also there has been this dirty words campaign really against her by the other candidates who knew that she was coming up. We'll come to that later, because the fire, certainly in this debate, was very much turned away from her. They obviously feel they've neutered her sufficiently at this point that they can turn their fire on other leading candidates. She also made a promise today, this wasn't in the debate, she made a promise to get Brexit redone. Now this is a curious one, because of course Boris campaigned in his election on getting Brexit done. The deal was done and he declared, that's it, Brexit's done. That then changed a little bit with the Northern Ireland stuff when it became obvious that what people had been telling them, and what the experts and even non-experts had been telling them would happen, was happening. When it became obvious that was in fact happening, it wasn't Project Fear. It was, Brexit's not done yet until we've sorted that out. There is a question at this point, and I think actually it's something the Tory party is going to suffer with actually in the long term. There will always be people in the party claiming that Brexit has not yet been properly done. That's going to be a big problem for them, because you can't pledge that, you can't say that Brexit's been done, and the public will get tired eventually of being told that Brexit has not yet been done, and will look at them and say, well, you're in charge, you have this massive stonking majority, why hasn't Brexit been done? So I think that came out in Mordaunt today, but that's a general problem as well. She also was quite big today on this idea that the government hasn't done enough about the various crises that are going on. Again, remarkably astute on questioning and saying it's not done enough done. Very shallow, narrow on answers. There were no answers for what should be done, really, apart from very vague ones that don't really mean anything. That's going to be a problem. Again, I'm going to keep saying that because this comes back to the been in power 10 years syndrome that I talked about yesterday. It's a big problem when you have these things happening. Liz Truss Her big thing this weekend, her and Tom Tugendhat actually, but we'll come to him in a second. Her big thing this weekend has been housing. And in particular, her pledge to get rid of Stalinist housing targets. Which is an interesting way of putting it. And I think it's she's using Stalinist there in the same way that most of the internet seems to use fascist as shorthand for anything bad, whilst just ignoring what that actually means and thereby reducing the impact if we ever had to use those words genuinely. She's not really determined, how she's going to address the housing crisis, except that she's going to get rid of targets. But of course, if you get rid of targets, then nobody's going to do it unless you give them an option. Now, she says that she wants to have housing, the increasing housing availability driven by market economics, basically. That's fine, but there's also not much evidence that will actually happen. And unless she's got a real plan to achieve that, it's kind of a hollow statement. It doesn't mean anything again. She criticised Sunak in this debate, and this was one of the points she was slightly better on, that on him being unable to make any real changes. She made the argument that I talked about yesterday. You've been in the Treasury for 2.5 years. Why should we believe that you're going to change anything now? She made that attack, and that brings us to the point I was talking about a second ago. Sunak, in this debate, very much the focus of attack. They've moved on from Mordaunt, moved on to Sunak. Sunak is now, because I think he's now, Mordaunt has been damaged, I think Sunak is now very much the target of the immediate attacks here. And there's a lot of people who are quite on the slightly snidey side of politics who are signed up with Liz and Kemi to a slightly lesser extent as well. So I think that that's a worthwhile point making, that Sunak is now the focus of attack. Liz Truss, again, she was talking about, we can't get back to the wage spiral, things like that. This was on public sector wages. I think very few people in public sector jobs would say that there is a wage spiral, but nevertheless. And I'll come back to this because there are parallels at the moment with a lot of the things these people are saying and previous events in history. I'll talk about that in the general section. She was also big, as she always is, on her delivery, on what she's delivered. There's not actually, again, we sort of discussed this yesterday. I'd quite like to see some evidence of things she has delivered, or at least things of value she's delivered, and I don't really think we've seen that yet. I don't think that's any different today. I don't think we've seen anything. She didn't bring out some new example of something she did last night that really delivered. I think, to be fair to her, I think part of the problem is that the one thing she could have played a good role in delivering on was Ukraine and the Russia situation, but that was largely taken out of her hands because Boris saw it as an easy way to get a quick win and ultimately try and save his skin in that utterly disgusting fashion that he was using it in. She also made the claim, she said, I'm born in Yorkshire, so I'm an honest person. Now, I know Yorkshiremen and Yorkshire women have a reputation as stout yeomen, as the sons of the soil. Personally, I don't buy. There must have been dishonest Yorkshiremen in the past. Please, down in the comments below, give me your top 10 dishonest Yorkshiremen. There'll be hundreds of them, I'm sure of it. I hope to see some of them there. Kemi Badenoch here, Badenoch rather. I found her a bit flat again, I have to say. Again, she was quite good on the personal stuff. Lots of talking about her kids, which is obviously the usual tool that politicians use. She also promised to maintain the manifesto promises that they did in 2019. All very well and good, except she did that about 2 minutes after promising to, or refusing to commit to keeping net zero. So, which was in the manifesto, incidentally. So we'll promise to keep the commitments, but maybe not that one. Not a great look. Not sure how that one will go. Tom Tugendhat, as I said, he has been big on housing this weekend. That was in his media grid very clearly. He's promising to build on brownfield sites, lots of housing. There's a bit of a problem there in that building on brownfield sites, it'll help a little bit, but there aren't enough brownfield sites that can actually, there aren't nearly enough to actually solve the housing crisis. So it's a bit of a non-solution, really. It's a sort of aspirational one rather than a full one. He also spoke about he wants to liberate Putin's gas fields. Without an invasion of Siberia, I'm not quite sure how he's planning on doing that. I know he's a military mind, but I'm not quite convinced that a full invasion of Russia is quite within our wheelhouse at the moment. I think we generally are happier sticking on the sides of that one and helping the Ukrainians as much as we can. So that was an interesting statement. Again, he didn't get pushed too much on that in the debate, which was a bit of a shame because I'd quite like to have found out exactly what he meant there. But he came across in this one as quite flat, I thought. He came across as a man who has sort of accepted that he's out probably tomorrow on the next vote. And actually, I felt he was flat because of that. I felt he knows it's over. He's now just doing his time. So a bit sad. You know, I said yesterday he's the one I think is probably objectively the best candidate. And the most sensible candidate. Always said he was going to go out. He's done remarkably well to make it this far, but he's not going to go any further. And I think he now is. I think the attempt to push that he can has now worn off. General comments on this then. Okay, let's do a bit of history. So one of the things that they've all been big on. We spoke about it yesterday. We spoke about it today. We spoke about it in other times. These tax cuts, they're all on about cutting taxes, on pulling back from the taxes, the national insurance rise, the corporation tax rises, things like that. Now, there are a few problems with that. Firstly, it's not costed, so we don't actually know, they're making commitments that are so vague enough in the air, they don't really mean anything. There is also the problem that if you do that, there's a reasonable chance that it will start impacting on inflation. Now, inflation is already high. If you start cutting taxes willy-nilly all over the place, it's likely to get higher. That is likely, possibly not hugely, but enough to be noticeable, is going to push inflation higher. We're already at the highest tax rate since the 40s, so you can see why they want to cut taxes. But tax cuts are not a universal solution. I think the only one of them who really seems to understand this is Rishi Sunak. Now, he's not selling an optimistic vision of the future, it has to be said, because his version means there's going to be a bit of austerity, there's going to be a lot of cuts. But this got me thinking, actually, of places, and actually I think we're in quite a similar place to this. So Ted Heath, who was Prime Minister in the 70s. There's quite a lot of parallels here with that period, or at least I think there are. So you have, inflation being very high. You've got strikes. I mean, for him, it was miners on strike. For us, obviously, it's, rail, things like that. There's also a bit of an energy crisis thing as well. I mean, back in the 70s, 74, I think it was, they had to go to a 3-day week. If you're too young to remember that and don't know what that involved, ask your parents. I'm sure they remember it. I know mine do. I was speaking to them about it when we were on holiday, because that's the sort of exciting thing Hills get up to on holiday, talking about energy crises and 3-day weeks. But there are parallels. The cost of living is high. It was back then, and I do wonder. Again, then that was a point where there seemed to be few new ideas, genuinely innovative stuff in politics. Much as I've been mentioning, we have now. We have a government that doesn't really have any ideas on how to get over these things, But the other one is that, the next election, the polling figures currently suggest that we're either on for a very small Labour majority. Personally, I think that's unlikely. Or on for a coalition government again, probably a Labour Lib Dem one. I think they'd be very wary about going in with the SNP, rightfully so, in my view. But that's exactly the stage that Ted Heath got to in 74. The election 74, Ted Heath, the Conservatives win a majority of seats, but not an absolute majority, so they can't govern as a majority party. There's a look into forming a coalition with the what was then the Liberal Party, led by Jeremy Thorpe. If you've not read about the Thorpe scandal, then do. It's probably, I think, the best scandal in British history. It's hilarious and tragic and carry on and funny, and it's brilliant. If you've not read that, I can give you tips on where to go to find out more about that. But the other place as well, at that election, or the election after that, sorry, in 79, Labour ran, one of the chief Labour images in that election was a picture with just a lit candle on it and the phrase, "Remember when the Tories said they had all the answers last time?" And that was a reference to the 3-day week where, electricity supplies were short, you had to, turn things off, you could only have electricity for certain times of the day, things like that. So that situation, I think there is a slight parallel there, and honestly I think the candidates and their future governments will be well advised to go back and read about that and try and work out some of the new ideas that might help take us past that and help avoid getting to that stage. I think we're still quite a way away from that stage, but nevertheless it is, I think, worthy of mention. One of the other things that seems to have come up a little bit is the independence of the Bank of England. Now this is a very interesting one. The bank's been independent for a good while now, but it's been mentioned a couple of times. I saw a mention of it the other day about Truss, but I haven't been able to find it. But Truss talking about, is this right? I think what she's referring to, because she elucidated a little bit on it in the debate, is that, she doesn't challenge the bank's independence as such, but she does think that possibly its mandate needs to be looked at a little bit, possibly needs to be reworked a little bit. I find it quite interesting that they're looking at the current economic crisis and saying, well, the problem's the Bank of England, not government policy. I think there's a slight disconnect and a slight looking for a scapegoat there. Don't get me wrong, the Bank of England is far from perfect, but actually I think it's being looked at slightly askance there as a bit of a scapegoat. They all mentioned, again, we had the Johnson issue come up. This wasn't about honesty, this was, would you let him have a job in your cabinet? None of them said they would. That's kind of irrelevant. It's a bit of an eye-catching one. It probably will be on a few of the headlines tomorrow. It's not actually relevant. Johnson will be, I'm pretty sure he will be gone from Parliament fairly soon. I don't think he's the sort who'll stick around. His allies have been briefing that he'll stick around till the next election. I think if it looks like the Standard Select Committee, Standards and Privileges Committee report into the Partygate scandal is going to come down against him and find that he misled the House, I suspect he'll make himself absent before then. They also had, and I found this quite an interesting format, they had a chance to ask one of the other candidates questions, and I quite liked that as a format. I thought it was very interesting, if nothing else, because it highlighted where their insecurities are and where their weaknesses are. Or where their potential weaknesses are. Again, we come back to Sunak being the attack point. Most of the questions were against him. Just a quick summary of what happened. Kenny Badenoch asked Sunak why he hadn't listened to her. She was at the Treasury at the time on the issue of COVID loan fraud. This was the issue that Lord Agnew, who was a Treasury Minister in the Lords, resigned over. He resigned live at the dispatch box. It was very entertaining. If you want to see it, I have a link to it. I can get you that link. It was brilliant. We don't often get live resignations from the dispatch box, but we did have one. The problem is, it's not entirely clear. We're assuming this happened. We're assuming she did give those warnings. Now, Lord Agnew has, in fact, I believe, supporting her campaign. So it is possible, it's possible, maybe even probable, that she did warn him. But it would be interesting to see the records on that, to see exactly how that discussion went down, because it might be that actually it wasn't quite as clear-cut in both ways as she liked to pitch it as. Sunak asked Liz Truss, which were you more embarrassed to be, a Lib Dem or a Remainer? Because, of course, Liz Truss supported Remain in the Brexit referendum, and much earlier in her political career was an ardent Lib Dem. There's a video online of her giving a very anti-monarchical speech at a Lib Dem conference when she was a lot younger. That was quite an interesting question, because he's obviously trying to say, you might have the party right lining up behind you, but how do they know they can trust you? It's quite an interesting one on that score. Truss, however, fired straight back. and asked Sunak about his policy on trade with China. Do you think we should be having more trade with China? That's very much, again, an appealing to her base. Her base is firmly on the right of the party, who are very sceptical about trade with China. Understandably so, I think it's fair to say, albeit they're possibly not doing it in the most pure, with the most purest of intentions, shall we say, the most pure of intentions. Mordaunt asks Sunak, why haven't you raised defence spending? Now, defence spending is for both Penny Mordaunt, who likes to tout her credentials as a naval reservist, although one of the other blows that she's taken in recent times has been that she claims to be on the Naval Reserve List number 6. It has been pointed out, though, he's not in fact a Naval Reserve List number 6 at all. But anyway, that's a slight side point. Military funding, defence funding is now at its lowest period. The army is the smallest it's been since the Napoleonic Wars. I'm always in a bit of a mixed place on defence spending, I have to say. I don't, in all honesty, I probably don't know enough about it to be able to make an authoritative comment. But I think it is a valid point to ask when we've seen recently, things going on in Ukraine with that. And Tom Tugendhat asked Penny Mordaunt, when are you going to reveal your plans for what you're going to do? And I think that's a very good question. It's one she doesn't really have an answer to. And she will need, if she's really hoping to get to those last two, which previously she was looking quite good on, now I think a little less so. I think it might be Liz Truss can edge her out. That is something she's going to have an answer on. Talking about foreign affairs again, they were asked about their position on going to the G20 if Vladimir Putin was in attendance. Penny Mordaunt, Badenoch and Tugendhat and Sunak said they wouldn't sit down with Vladimir Putin at that. Liz Truss possibly applying a little bit of realpolitik here, as Foreign Secretary said she would. It would be interesting to see if that actually happened, I think, except in perhaps the widest of group senses. Climate change came up here. Now, we talked about this yesterday. We talked about how wavery they'd all been on it. They were sort of trying to pin down a little bit today, particularly on whether they supported net zero. Badenoch, as we've already discussed, refused to commit to it. Liz Truss said she did, but she'd get rid of green levies. She said she didn't think that was the right way to do it. There is the question of, if you don't have green levies and things like that, how are you going to actually achieve these targets? Because people might not do it voluntarily, which I think is a valid point. Sunak gave his backing. He said, yeah, I'm committed to net zero. But he said you can't take people too far too fast. The problem is that was a good argument 10, 20 years ago. We're now at the point where if you don't take people a long way very fast, by the time you and I get to their age, we're past the point of no return. We're at the point where the planet is kind of on a path to if not extinction, then distinctly unpleasant living conditions. He says, sweltering away here and looking forward to the now 40 degrees that we're supposed to be enjoying here on Tuesday. Mordaunt has previously said, she didn't discuss it quite so much in the debate, but that she reckons that environmentalism and conservatism go together hand in glove, which historically has been true, to be fair. Whether that appeals, I don't know. That'll be an interesting one. I think she's sort of going, she's committing there in the hope that she can carry people with her. I think it's probably another weak point for her with the more right wing of the party. We'll have to see how that plays out. All five of them were also asked, would you have a general election if you were elected? All five of them said no. Now, that's hardly surprising. The polling figures are not great for the Tories at the moment. When the new leader comes in, they will inevitably have a little bit of a polling bump, because they always do. Quite whether that lasts at all is a different question, and will be very reliant on what they do in their politics. I think of all of them, the only one who might have a realistic hope of having a sustained bump based on his performance in this and his performance generally is Rishi Sunak. He might get a bit of a sustained bump. Will it be enough? I don't know. So it's sensible for them to refuse to commit to an election. Personally, I don't mind that. I know a lot of people think, oh no, every time you change a leader, you should have an election. I don't like that. We do not have a system in this country of personal mandates. You do not vote for the Prime Minister, you vote for your party or for the party. So personally, I'm not opposed to that. I think it plays a bit too much into what Boris Johnson has been trying to do, which is to change our parliamentary system into a presidential one where you're voting for the Prime Minister. You know, there's been a lot of talk about, you know, Boris has this massive personal mandate. No, Boris has the mandate he was given in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, his constituency. Other than that, Boris does not have a personal mandate. And this idea of when you change leader, you have to have an election, a lot of people, even on the opposition side, are very keen on that idea. I think it's a very bad route to go. You're indulging that fantasy of the presidential system if you do that. I don't think it's a good thing. We shouldn't do it. I think actually they're right. I don't think it'll make that much difference, to be honest, in terms of the results of the election. I don't see any of them turning the entire ship around overnight. I'm not convinced it will make that much, make that many waves in either direction. So, closing statements on this one were excruciating. God, they were painful. It was like having your toenails ripped out. It was dreadful. But anyway, it's closed. That's it. They're done. They were boring. They were dreadful. We'll get over it. So overall, this debate, it didn't take us much further than yesterday, and that's the problem. That's one of the very key problems. This lack of ideas is really coming to haunt them. So that was debate number 2. Debate number 3 is Tuesday, I believe. By then, I think we'll have lost at least one more candidate. That, I believe, is a Sky News one. I will put something out on that on Tuesday night. Tuesday night, possibly Wednesday. Depends a little bit on when I get to watch it. So yes, that was today's debate. As with yesterday's video, I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know, like it, share it with anyone who might be interested, who wants a bit of sort of analysis and summary. Check out any other links in the little description bit. Hopefully you can see the top of my head today. I sat down and did a few test shots this time, so hopefully you'll be able to see a little bit of space before my head, on top of my head today. I'm not crammed up like this, like a little old crony man. So yes, I shall see you later in the week. Have a good one. Stay safe Monday, Tuesday. Really can't stress this. 40 degrees, 38 degrees, anything like that. Anything above body temperature, human body temperature, 37 degrees. Anything above that, dangerous. It's not just a nice day in the sun. It's dangerous. Do be careful. And I will see you then. Bye for now.